On an ordinary evening in a parking lot, Keanu Reeves came across a homeless mother holding her small child tightly inside an old, battered car. The only place they could call home. The fogged-up windows, the hanging clothes swaying gently, and the exhausted look in the mother's eyes told a story that words could never fully capture. What could compel a Hollywood star like Keanu Reeves to stop, unable to simply walk away, and choose to act instead? What unfolded next not only transformed the lives of the mother and child, but also touched the hearts of millions. Have you ever believed that a stranger could completely alter the fate of a family? Don't miss the story, as it promises to leave you speechless with emotion. The story began. Keanu Reeves exited the supermarket with 2 grocery bags in hand. The night was cold, and a light breeze rustled the trees in the parking lot, whispering into the darkness. Adjusting the hood of his coat, he scanned his surroundings, a habit he had cultivated over the years, always observing yet never rushing. This habit kept him grounded in reality, even when the flash of cameras blurred the lines between his life and the world outside. Today had been long but fulfilling. The days filming for his new project had wrapped up earlier than expected, giving him a rare opportunity to check off smaller tasks like buying groceries and savoring life's simple pleasures. Mundane moments like parking lots, checkout lines, and shopping carts helped him find balance amidst the chaos of fame. As he stepped out into the parking lot, his gaze fell upon an old, weathered car tucked away in a secluded corner. The vehicle, clearly several decades old, had fogged-up windows. Inside, clothes hung loosely, swaying faintly in the breeze. He frowned, an unsettling feeling creeping in. At the same time, he noticed a woman gathering shopping carts nearby. Her clothes were worn and faded, her body language heavy with exhaustion. Her wary eyes carried a mix of fatigue and vigilance, as though she was trying to disappear into the background, despite the physical strain of her task. Keanu's eyes returned to the car. Now he realized the woman repeatedly glanced toward it, as if it were the only sanctuary she had in an unpredictable world. A thought struck him, sending a chill through his body. Was that car her home? The idea unsettled him deeply. Resolute, Keanu decided to approach. He walked slowly, careful not to alarm her, intent on understanding the situation and, if possible, offering help. "Hello," he said softly, his voice warm and sincere. The woman, who was about to push another cart, froze in place. She glanced at him briefly, her eyes flashing with confusion, then quickly looked away as if trying to avoid his gaze. "Are you all right? Is there anything I can help with?" he asked, maintaining a respectful distance so she wouldn't feel pressured. "No, I'm fine. Thank you," she replied, her voice cold but not entirely masking the undertone of apprehension. She took a step back, gripping the cart tightly, her words hurried as if eager to end the conversation immediately. Keanu nodded, realizing that pushing further might only make her retreat more. "All right, I understand. If you need anything, I'll be around." She didn't respond, only hurried back toward the car. The car door opened, and she quietly slid inside, her movements mechanical and practiced, as though they had become second nature. Keanu remained where he was, his eyes fixed on her. Through the fogged window, he caught a faint silhouette of a small child stirring slightly in her arms. He blinked, trying to process what he had just seen. A heavy feeling welled up in his chest. He knew he couldn't just walk away. The image of the mother and child etched itself deeply into his mind, stirring something within him, compelling him to act. As she gently adjusted the child in her arms, Keanu turned and walked away, but her silhouette clung to him, refusing to let go. Once inside his car, he glanced back at the shadowed corner of the parking lot. Through the foggy glass, the small figure of the child remained visible. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Starting his engine, he knew he couldn't ignore what he had just witnessed. The next morning, Keanu Reeves returned to the same supermarket. The image of the weary woman, burdened with stress, and her old car with its hanging clothes, lingered relentlessly in his thoughts. Parking in the same spot, he scanned the area. The car was still there, tucked in the corner, its windows fogged with condensation and its interior filled with belongings. A short distance away, he spotted the woman carrying a plastic bag, walking slowly toward the car. Keanu waited, observing from a distance. As she opened the car door and placed the bag of groceries on the back seat, he quietly retrieved 2 items he had prepared earlier: a bottle of mineral water and a new blanket, still sealed in its packaging. He knew every gesture had to be discreet so she wouldn't feel humiliated. Slowly, he walked over and placed the items on the car's hood, ensuring they were visible enough for her to notice. Without saying a word, he returned to his car and waited. A few minutes later, the woman opened her car door, cautiously glancing at the hood. Her eyes lingered on the items before darting around, as if searching for the person who had left them there. Keanu remained silent, waiting for her to take the items before her courage faded. She hesitated but eventually reached out and picked up the bottle and the blanket. He noticed her lips moving slightly, as if whispering something, though he couldn't hear her words. Once she held the items in her hands, she quickly returned to her car and shut the door. Keanu started his car and left the parking lot, a mix of relief and helplessness washing over him. He felt relieved to have done something, yet his heart remained heavy, as if what he had done still wasn't enough. On the 3rd day, he returned to the parking lot. He knew he needed to speak with her again, but this time, he had to approach even more carefully. From afar, he saw the woman pushing shopping carts again, her face etched with fatigue. He waited until she moved closer to her car before approaching. "Hello," he began softly, his voice gentle, almost a whisper. She stopped, startled, and her discomfort was evident. "I'm the one who left the water and blanket for you yesterday. I hope you didn't mind." The woman looked at him, her eyes still filled with the same cautiousness as before, though now there was a hint of curiosity. "It was you? Why?" The question came out quickly, almost accusatory. "I saw you yesterday and thought you might need them. That's all," Keanu replied with a slight shrug. He understood that, in situations like this, pushing too hard could backfire. "I understand if you don't want to talk. I don't want to invade your space." The woman remained silent for a moment before softly saying, "Thank you for the water and the blanket." Her voice was cautious, as if each word carried fear. Fear that saying too much might make her vulnerable. Keanu nodded, respecting her pace. "I just want to help if you'll let me. If not, that's okay too. But sometimes accepting help isn't weakness. It's a way to move forward." The woman didn't respond directly, but he noticed her posture relaxing slightly. She was still hesitant, but the faint glimmer of gratitude in her expression was a small step forward. Keanu was about to head back to his car when a muffled cry emerged from inside the old vehicle. It was the stifled wail of a child. He paused, glancing at her but refraining from asking questions. The sound seemed to unsettle the woman. She hurriedly opened the car door, picking up the child and gently rocking them in her arms. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Do you need anything for the baby? Formula, diapers, or anything else they might need?" The woman looked at him, her exhausted eyes reflecting an internal struggle. Her instinct was to refuse, but Keanu could sense something shifting in her gaze. This mother, constantly caught between her pride and the instinct to protect her child, seemed to be losing that battle. "I need formula," she said, her voice barely audible. Keanu nodded, recognizing that her willingness to accept help was a significant turning point. "Wait here. I'll be back in a few minutes." Without waiting for her response, he quickly walked toward the supermarket. When he returned, he carried a bag containing baby formula, diapers, and a pack of baby wipes. The woman looked at him with more skepticism than ever, yet she still accepted the bag. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice so soft it sounded as if she feared losing something precious. She clutched the bag tightly, holding it as though it was the most valuable thing she'd ever owned. As she adjusted the child in her arms, Keanu stood silently beside her, his gaze filled with empathy. "I know this isn't my business, but if you ever need anything else, I'll always be here," Keanu said, his voice low but sincere. The woman hesitated for a moment before softly replying, It wasn't supposed to be like this. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but Keanu could sense the deep pain in her words. It wasn't just a lament. It felt like a silent cry for help. He realized that what he'd seen was only the tip of the iceberg, and the story behind this woman and her child would change his life. He was ready to face whatever came next. The next day, Keanu returned to the parking lot. Everything seemed the same, but there was something different about the woman's demeanor. She stood outside her car, holding her child in her arms, her gaze distant, a mix of exhaustion and resignation. Keanu knew he needed to approach her cautiously. "Hello," he called out, maintaining enough distance for her to feel at ease. The woman looked up, her expression showing a flicker of surprise, though it was less guarded than the day before. "You came back," she said, her voice carrying more curiosity than suspicion. Keanu gave her a gentle smile. "I said I'd be around. I hope you didn't feel pressured yesterday." She slowly shook her head. "No, you were very kind." Keanu realized this was the right moment to take a small step forward. "May I sit?" he asked, gesturing toward the edge of the curb near her car. She hesitated briefly but then nodded. Keanu sat down, resting his elbows on his knees, letting a brief silence pass before speaking again. "You don't have to share anything if it makes you uncomfortable, but may I ask your name?" "Grace." "It's nice to meet you, Grace," he said sincerely. "And what about the little one? What's his name?" She looked down at the child, now calmer in her arms. "Ethan." Keanu smiled. "Ethan is a strong name. I like that." His compliment seemed to ease something within Grace. She relaxed slightly, though she remained cautious. Understanding the importance of not rushing, Keanu decided to share something personal. "You know, I've been through hard times too," he said gently. "I lost people who meant the world to me. There were moments when I didn't think I could keep going, but somehow I did. It wasn't easy, but I had help. And sometimes accepting help is the first step to saving yourself." Grace listened silently, her gaze still fixed on the child in her arms. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, almost breaking. "Sometimes I feel like I'm alone in the world, and no one cares." Keanu shook his head slowly. "I care," he said firmly. "And even though we don't know each other well yet, I want to help you, if you'll let me." She didn't respond immediately, but something in her expression shifted, more open, more vulnerable. That night, as Grace slept in her car, holding Ethan in her arms, Keanu quietly returned to the parking lot. He carried bags filled with baby food, personal hygiene products, and a few toys. Carefully, he placed everything by the car door, along with a handwritten note, "To Grace and Ethan." No need to respond, just a little care. The next morning, when Grace woke up, she saw the items beside the car. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She held Ethan tightly, her eyes welling up with tears. As she picked up the toys, her vision blurred with tears she couldn't hold back. A simple gesture, yet one filled with profound meaning. Part of her wanted to reject it all, to cling to what little control she had left in her life. But another part of her knew this was exactly what she needed. She looked around, but Keanu had already gone. Still, something inside her began to change. The next day, Grace decided to speak with Keanu. When he appeared in the parking lot, she called out to him before he could come closer. "Thank you," she said, holding one of the bags he had left. "This really means a lot." Keanu smiled. "I'm glad it helped. If you need anything else, just let me know." Grace hesitated, as if battling with herself before speaking. I don't usually talk about this, but..." She took a deep breath as though gathering the courage to continue. "I've lost everything. My husband, my home, my life. And what happened afterward, it's hard to believe." Keanu met her gaze, his expression serious yet filled with empathy. He could tell she was on the brink of sharing something significant, perhaps the first step toward rebuilding the trust she'd lost. "There's no rush. I'll be here whenever you're ready," he said. Grace swallowed and nodded. For the first time in a long while, she felt that someone genuinely cared enough to listen. As Grace looked at Keanu, her eyes brimmed with emotion. Finally, she let go of what she had been holding in for so long. Everything started when he passed away. My husband, she said, her voice breaking. After that, everything fell apart. And then, something happened. Something no one would believe. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his face calm, but focused. He knew her story was only beginning, and it was likely deeper and more painful than he had imagined. Grace took a deep breath, holding Ethan tightly against her chest. Her gaze turned distant, as if searching through memories she had tried to bury. It all started a year ago, she began, her voice trembling. My husband, Daniel, died in a car accident. He was on his way home from work. It was an ordinary evening, or at least it was supposed to be. Keanu remained silent, giving her the space to continue. Grace wiped away a stubborn tear that slid down her cheek. When the police knocked on my door, it felt like the ground had vanished beneath my feet. I couldn't even process it at the time. I just remember the officer saying he didn't suffer. But that didn't matter. He was gone. She paused, her lips trembling as she struggled to stay composed. After that, everything unraveled. The insurance money wasn't enough to cover the bills. They started piling up. And Daniel's parents, Grace stopped, clenching her jaw. They said I wasn't capable of taking care of Ethan. Keanu frowned. They tried to take custody of Ethan? Grace nodded slowly. They filed for custody, claiming I was emotionally unstable. And maybe they were right. I was a complete mess at the time. But everything I did was for Ethan. She swallowed hard, trying to maintain her composure before continuing. I couldn't afford a good lawyer. When I realized the odds were stacked against me, I packed up the car, gathered what little savings I had left, and ran to another state. I thought it would just be temporary, that I could find a job and get back on my feet. Her voice turned bitter. I found a job at a coffee shop. I started saving money, and for a short time it felt like things were getting better. But then a customer started harassing me. He said disgusting things, and one day, I couldn't take it anymore. I yelled at him. I tried to explain to my manager, but they didn't care. They fired me. Keanu closed his eyes briefly, feeling a tightness in his chest. Every word Grace spoke revealed more of the burden she carried. When the money started running out, I was evicted from my rental. The car became our home. I've tried finding work, but it's so hard when I have Ethan with me. No one wants to hire a mother they think can't focus. Her voice grew quieter, trembling with frustration. Since then, I've been living like this. Every day is just about surviving. Taking odd jobs, pushing carts, hoping no one notices we're living in this parking lot. Finally, she stopped, her eyes brimming with tears. And I know this is wrong. He deserves better than this. I should be doing better, but I'm so tired. Keanu felt his chest tighten as he listened to her story. Leaning forward, he rested his elbows on his knees, his voice measured and empathetic. Grace, you're fighting a battle no one should have to face alone. And no one can fault you for that. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with doubt. But I should have figured this out. I should have. Keanu gently interrupted her. You're trying. That's more than many people ever do. You're fighting for Ethan every single day. That's incredible. Grace was silent, letting his words sink in. Finally, she whispered, What do I do now? I don't see a way out anymore. Keanu looked at her, his gaze steady. We'll figure it out. Together. Promise. Before she could respond, he stood and started walking toward his car. Wait here. I'll be back in 20 minutes. As Keanu drove away from the parking lot, Grace watched through the rearview mirror, her heart torn between hope and fear. She wanted to believe he could help her, but life had taught her not to trust too easily. Inside the car, Keanu picked up his phone and began making calls. He knew he needed to act quickly. Whatever came next, this was the first step in changing the lives of Grace and Ethan, giving them the fresh start they so desperately needed. 40 minutes later, Keanu returned to the supermarket parking lot. His car engine was still running. As he stepped out, Grace, sitting in her old car with Ethan in her arms, looked up at the sound. Her eyes reflected doubt but also a flicker of curiosity. Keanu approached her, a plan already forming in his mind. Standing at a respectful distance, he held up a small envelope. I've arranged for a room for you and Ethan. It's a simple motel, but it's clean and safe. Tonight you can rest there, and tomorrow we'll figure out the next steps together. Grace stepped out of the car, clutching Ethan tightly. Her gaze shifted between the envelope and Keanu's face, conflicted. I can't accept this. I don't want charity. This isn't charity, Keanu said firmly, his voice gentle but resolute. It's help. Everyone needs help at some point. Please, let me do this for you. She hesitated, her exhaustion evident in every part of her. Finally, she reached out and took the envelope. Inside were the motel room key, the address, and some cash for food. She swallowed hard, fighting back the surge of emotions. Thank you, she whispered, her voice so soft it was barely audible. Keanu smiled. You're welcome. I'll follow your car to make sure you get there safely. The motel room was modest, but to Grace, it felt like pure luxury. A large bed with fresh linens, a private bathroom, and the warm glow of a bedside lamp created a cozy haven. She gently laid Ethan on the bed and tucked him in carefully. For the first time in weeks, the boy seemed to sleep deeply, undisturbed by the noise and discomfort of the car. Grace sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes brimming with tears as she looked at her son. The tears began to fall uncontrollably. For the first time in a very long while, she felt a small sense of safety, a glimmer of hope. Her gaze landed on the note that came with the key. Keanu's simple words echoed in her mind. You are not alone. We'll get through this together. Outside, Keanu sat in his car, gazing at the night sky where faint stars flickered through the city lights. His mind circled around Grace's life, the injustices she had endured, the daily struggles she faced, and most importantly, what he could do to truly help her rebuild her life. He knew that providing a comfortable night's rest or a little money wasn't enough. She needed something greater, something that would give her and Ethan the chance for a fair new beginning. Picking up his phone, he began making calls. We're going to do something big, he murmured to himself while texting a close friend, explaining the situation. No one should have to go through this alone. Inside the room, Grace tucked Ethan under the blanket. For the first time in months, she lay down on an actual mattress. Exhaustion quickly overtook her body, but before she drifted into sleep, she whispered, maybe, just maybe, this is a beginning. The next morning, Keanu woke early, ready to carry out his plan. He had spent the night calling contacts, activating his network, and brainstorming practical ways to help Grace and Ethan. For him, this wasn't charity. It was about giving her the opportunity to rebuild her life. His first stop was a community center he had supported in the past. Meeting with the center's director, he explained Grace's situation. She needs temporary housing, social support, and, if possible, a job. She's a fighter, but she's stuck in a cycle she can't escape from. The director nodded, their expression empathetic. We can arrange temporary housing for a few weeks and connect her with social workers. We'll also refer her to some job opportunities. Keanu thanked them, his resolve firm. He knew this was just the first step in a long journey to help Grace and Ethan find a new beginning filled with hope. Later that afternoon, Keanu returned to the motel. Grace was sitting on the bed, holding Ethan in her arms, when she heard a soft knock on the door. Opening the door, she found Keanu smiling warmly, holding a few bags in his hands. I brought these for you, he said, handing her the bags. Inside were new clothes for her and Ethan, along with a set of basic hygiene supplies. Grace looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion. I don't know how to thank you. You've done so much already. Keanu shook his head, his voice gentle but resolute. You don't need to thank me, but if you're ready, I'd like to talk about the next steps. She nodded and invited him in. While Ethan played with the toys Keanu had brought earlier, Grace sat down and listened as he explained the plan. I've arranged temporary housing for you and Ethan for the next few weeks while we figure out everything else. It's a safe place, and there will be people to support you. I've also reached out to a few people about job opportunities. Everything will depend on what you feel comfortable doing. Grace blinked, overwhelmed by the care and effort he had put into helping her. It was hard to believe that someone could invest so much in her and her son. "Why are you doing this for us?" she asked, her voice trembling. Keanu paused for a moment before answering. "Because I believe everyone deserves a chance to start over. And because I can. If I have the ability to help, doing nothing would be the real wrong." Keanu took Grace to the community center, where the director greeted them warmly. The center was simple but clean and welcoming, with private rooms and shared spaces for families in need. Grace was shown to a small room with a bed for her and a crib for Ethan. As she looked around, tears welled up in her eyes. "I don't know how to express what this means to me. I don't even know if I'll ever be able to repay you." Keanu smiled. "Don't worry about that. For now, just focus on yourself and Ethan. This isn't charity. It's the beginning of a new chapter." That evening, as she placed Ethan in the new crib, Grace felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. Outside, Keanu spoke with the center's director to discuss the next steps. "I want to make sure she gets all the support she needs. If she needs more time or additional opportunities, please let me know." The director smiled. "Don't worry. You've given her something no one else has before. A chance." The following week, Grace began adjusting to her new life. With the support of the community center and Keanu's connections, she secured a part-time receptionist job at a small office. On her first morning, Keanu accompanied her to the office door. "This is just the beginning," he said with an encouraging smile. "You're going to do great." She stepped inside, nervous but welcomed by friendly colleagues and an understanding manager who knew about her circumstances. That evening, she shared with Keanu that she had decided to allow her late husband's family to visit Ethan under her terms. Keanu responded with a voice full of encouragement. "You've made a tough but brave decision. Giving them a chance to show their growth while maintaining control of the situation shows how much stronger you've become." Grace smiled, feeling safe and in control of her life for the first time. Watching Ethan play on the floor, she knew she was building a hopeful future. A future no longer clouded by loneliness. One day, as they sat in a small cafe sipping coffee, Grace looked at Keanu, her smile a mix of gratitude and determination. "I want you to know that one day, I'll pay back everything you've done for me." Keanu shook his head with a gentle smile. "Grace, you're already paying it back. Every step you take to improve life for yourself and Ethan is enough. I didn't do this expecting anything in return." Her smile widened, but her eyes held a serious glint. "Even so, I want to help others just like you helped me." Keanu nodded. "That's the best way to repay it. Turn your story into inspiration for others." That evening, after saying goodbye to Keanu and watching him drive away, Grace looked up at the starry sky. She knew she hadn't just been given a chance to change her life. She had also changed his. In her small apartment, Grace put Ethan to bed and watched him sleep peacefully. For the first time, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, with courage and hope. Her story was far from over, but the next chapter had begun with promise. Both she and Keanu carried the belief that, even in the darkest moments, light can always be found, sometimes from the most unexpected places. This story reminds us that compassion and timely support can change a life. If you were in Keanu Reeves' position, what would you do to help a struggling mother and her child? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice could inspire more meaningful actions. If this story touched your heart, share it with your friends and family to spread the message of empathy, hope, and second chances. Thank you for staying with us until the end of the story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to catch more heartfelt stories. Let's build a community filled with love and sharing. Wishing you health, happiness, and positivity always. Thank you for supporting the channel. Like, share, and subscribe to stay updated with the latest stories. These stories are curated from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared to promote human values and have been rewritten with AI support. If there are any errors, we kindly ask for your understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.